The strangest tax in the Middle Ages, the celibacy tax. Imagine waking up in an era where the simple fact of being single could be expensive, literally expensive. We're not talking about family pressure, sideways glances at Christmas dinner, or jokes from aunts and uncles. We're talking about something much more direct, authoritarian, and at the very least unusual, a tax. Yes, a levy imposed not for possessing something, but for not having someone. Have you ever heard of the bachelor tax, or as it was also known, the celibacy tax? During the Middle Ages, in various parts of Europe, being single wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a reason for financial penalty. If you were a man of marrying age and hadn't done so, get ready to open your wallet. But what could have motivated governments and churches to interfere so directly in people's love lives? Was it merely religious moralism, an obsession with fertility? Or was there, behind it, a sharp economic logic, perhaps even brilliant by medieval standards? Moreover, why did this tax primarily affect the wealthier individuals? Was celibacy being regarded as a luxury, or perhaps as a threat to social order? This is just the beginning of a story that blends social control, state interests, religious dogmas, and one of the most bizarre medieval tax collection spreadsheets. Throughout this video, we'll dive into the historical context of this curious tribute, understand its origin, who imposed it, what the consequences of resisting were, and to what extent this absurd idea of taxing singles shaped convenience marriages and family strategies that still resonate today. Because after all, this tax is just another example, unusual yet revealing, of how money and power walk hand in hand, even when it comes to one's heart. If you think you've seen it all when it comes to unusual taxes, brace yourself. This story is about to challenge your imagination. In the Middle Ages, getting married was not just a personal choice. It was often a social, moral, and economic obligation. The medieval world was structured around the family as the basis of production, succession, and stability. Each union represented not only an emotional or religious bond, but also a cog in the functioning of feudal power, the church, and even tax collection. And when someone refused to fit into this model, the system reacted with fines. Thus was born what we now refer to as the bachelor tax, a bizarre levy, but one that had very real effects on the lives of thousands of European men. The logic behind it was straightforward. Men who remained single were viewed as maladjusted individuals. They were not contributing to population growth, not forging family alliances, and worst of all, they were not producing heirs to ensure the continuity of the domestic and feudal economy. Rather than mere moralism, there was a strong component of social control and taxation. Marriages generated records, inheritances, joint properties, and primarily new subjects. For the church, it meant more faithful born within the doctrine. For the feudal lords, it meant additional labor for the fields and more contributors in the future. The tax varied from place to place, but in many cases, the wealthier the single man, the higher the amount levied. It was as if being single was a form of emotional evasion, and the state wanted its cut. For nobles, remaining single was often unthinkable, as it could be seen as a dishonor, unproductivity, or even suspicion of rebellion against the prevailing system. This type of tribute was recorded in regions such as France, the Holy Roman Empire, and even in territories of the Iberian Peninsula, with varied names and rules. And although it may seem absurd today, it reveals something very serious: the extent to which states and religious institutions were willing to intervene in the most intimate sphere of human life to ensure their order and perpetuation. In the next few minutes, we will delve into the behind the scenes of this unusual tax, the reasons that led to its creation, and the lasting effects of a policy that attempted to turn love, or its absence, into a source of income. To understand how the tax on celibacy emerged, we need to delve into the extrinsic political, social, and religious structures of medieval Europe. This was not a time of individual freedom. In fact, Each individual was first and foremost a cog in a larger machine: the family, the fiefdom, the church, the kingdom. Everything revolved around well-defined roles, and marriage was seen as the fulfillment of a duty to God, to society, and to the state. In many kingdoms, particularly between the 12th and 15th centuries, male celibacy outside of the clergy began to be viewed as a threat to the established order. A man who did not marry did not produce heirs, did not forge alliances between families, and only funnel personal resources without generating social fruits. In other words, he was unproductive in the eyes of the ruling elite. And this unproductivity needed to be addressed, corrected. How? With a tax. In medieval France, for instance, records indicate that certain feudal lords imposed taxes on men who reached a certain age without having married. In the Holy Roman Empire, there were places where celibacy after the age of 25 could be interpreted as a renunciation of civic responsibilities, something worthy of punishment. And don't think that this was limited to peasants. On the contrary, the higher an individual's social status, the greater the expectation. Nobles, merchants, influential guild craftsmen, all were subject to it. The reasoning was clear: those who have more can and should contribute more. If one chose not to form a family, then at least contribute financially to the stability of. Some scholars consider that this tax was less about punishing singles and more about forcing marriage as a political strategy. Marriages united families, protected properties, and created networks of influence. A single person was often a weak link. A nobleman without heirs could generate disputes over land. A childless bourgeois interrupted the continuity of his guild. All of this concerned those in power. Not surprisingly, the church supported these measures with enthusiasm. After all, marriage was a sacrament, and fleeing from it could be seen as disobedience. At the same time, ensuring marriages meant baptisms, children, more parishioners, and of course, more tithes. It was marriage as a state policy, and celibacy a failure that needed to be taxed. The collection of the celibacy tax generated profound impacts, and not always immediately visible. In a world where social pressure was already immense for men to get married, the additional weight of a financial penalty functioned like an invisible gear, pushing thousands of young people towards forced, rushed, or purely convenience-motivated marriages. Picture a young craftsman from a middle-class background, age 26, with no inheritance and modest ambitions. Love? Perhaps he didn't even have time for that. However, under the threat of a hefty tax, he was encouraged to find a wife, not out of desire or affinity, but to escape a debt to the local lord or ecclesiastical administration. The result? A generation of cold, often unstable unions sustained more by obligation than by choice. For the elites, the effect was even more political. Unmarried nobles were not only a threat to the continuity of their houses, they were also misplaced pieces on the boards of family alliances. Marriage was a diplomatic instrument, and the absence of it could jeopardize regional strategies. Imposing a tax on celibacy worked in this context as a push from the state to keep the game running. But not everyone complied. There was resistance. Men who chose celibacy as a way of life, some out of devotion, others out of independence, began to be marginalized or viewed as eccentric. There are records of social and even ecclesiastical persecution of those who insisted on remaining single without religious justification. In some regions, the collection of the tax was accompanied by public humiliations, such as proclamations in public squares or symbols marking the offenders. Interestingly, this state control over intimate life sparked debates, albeit timid ones, about the limits of authority. After all, to what extent can power intervene in the affective and personal choices of its subjects? This discussion, embryonic in the Middle Ages, would be revisited centuries later in debates about civil liberty and individual rights. In the end of the day, the bachelor tax not only stirred up currency and marriages. It shaped behaviors, reinforced patriarchal structures, and showed that, in the history of humanity, even love can be taxed if it serves the interests of those at the top of the pyramid. At first glance, the tribute of celibacy may seem like a bizarre curiosity lost in the dusty archives of the Middle Ages. But upon closer inspection, we realize that it reveals something profound: the ability of power structures to infiltrate even the most intimate decisions of human beings. Whether to marry or not ceased to be a personal choice and became a civic duty, and those who refused to comply paid the price. Rather than an unusual tax, the celibacy levy was a social engineering tool. It was the state saying, "We want you to get married, have children, inherit property, maintain order, and supply the system." And when this didn't happen spontaneously, the wallet was tapped to correct the deviation. Today, this type of policy seems inconceivable. But have we really evolved that much? How many decisions do we still make about relationships, children, finances based on external, social, or economic pressures? How often does the system still reward certain lifestyles and penalize others, even if in a more subtle way? The truth is that the past helps us understand how the present was shaped. Moreover, this story reminds us that money and power have always gone hand in hand, even in the most unlikely situations. Whether through curious taxes or laws that direct the population's behavior, great empires, be they religious, political, or economic, have always sought ways to control the future. And to achieve this, they often relied on control of the present. If you found this story astonishing, imagine how many others are hidden behind the scenes of economy and power. On the Mundo Enriquecedor channel, our mission is exactly that: to reveal the hidden side of the decisions that shape the world, to show how money influenced empires, religions, wars, and even relationships. Now, I invite you, if this trip to the past has piqued your interest, leave a comment. Do you agree that the state should have this kind of power? Have you ever imagined living in a time when being single was grounds for a fine? Like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because we still have many unusual stories to share with you. And remember, understanding the past is the best way to decipher the present and to build a more conscious future.